All right. Well, hey, everyone. Welcome to Herding Squirrels, a podcast about everything teams because teams are nuts in the best way. Joining me today is Jiovanni Rosario, Controls Engineering Manager at Amazon. And Jiovanni has worn many hats in the tech industry. He's been a controls engineer, sales engineer, software developer, and even an instructor. These days, he manages a team of controls engineers, keeping data center servers cool and powered. He shares leadership stories on Substack, mentors aspiring managers, and recently became a dad. Oh, welcome, Giovanni.
Hey, Brandon, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Oh, thanks for being here. Excited to play with you today. As you know, on Herding Squirrels, we like to play with Legos to tell stories. So, with that, we're going to jump right into our second build. And the second build is I want you to build a model that tells a story about who you are outside of work. No wrong answer. Use as many pieces as you have.
That's pretty cool.
Let me see yours.
I made this. So it's what I see in this Lego piece. It does look like just a bunch of squares, like kind of like the last one. But to me, I see this like when I think about who I am outside of work. You know, I'm a husband. I'm now a dad. I'm a son, brother, cousin, uncle, and I see this as like a house, like almost like our townhouse is like rectangle. It's just like it's very squared. So this is like a townhouse. This is like a little patch of grass. There's only one person Lego, so this represents me. This is like these two flowers on the side are like my wife and my daughter. And then this block here is just like, you know, the rest of my family, like, you know, parents, brothers, cousins, nephew, nieces. And that's ultimately like work is obviously is something I'm passionate about, but this is who I am outside of work. And this is ultimately why I work so hard for.
I love it. That's fantastic. Oh, wonderful. I love the use of the flowers. And yes, great job. So I want to pivot into teams now. And right, so like the reason we're here, right, is to talk about, you know, teams and leadership and how we all work together. And so for your next build, I want you to think about what's the best team that you've ever been a part of. And maybe you were leading, maybe you were a participant. Again, what is the best team you've ever been a part of? And build a model that really represents why you believe that team was so amazing.
I'm thinking about it. I'm like, should I be biased and just choose my own team? But no, I think I'm gonna go with a certain direction. I think I know what I'll do.
Awesome. So Giovanni, I'd love to see your amazing team model. What did you build?
All right. So this is what I built. You may be asking yourself, what is this? So I've obviously, you know, I worked on a lot of teams since I graduated, but the first team that I was a part of after I graduated college, it was the first time that I like really started working on data centers, and there was a few of us on the team, but there was three of us that really clicked, and like we started our careers in the data center industry around the same time, within like a year of each other, and almost like 10 years later, like we're still friends. And I actually just met up with them this week for lunch. And it's in the beginning, like I feel like, you know, we both started off in the industry at the same level, and we all worked really hard. We all challenged each other to get better. We all helped each other when we needed it. And we've even like kind of, in a way, we even ended up working together at Amazon for a little while. They moved on to another company, but you know we still get together and just talk shop and discuss like you know where we're at in our careers and things like that. So that team we used to refer to ourselves as like the A team because like we believe that like when we were together on the project, there's nothing that we couldn't deliver. So this represents like that. This boat is like us in the data center industry. And then I couldn't find like good representation, but these three little blocks represent like the three of us. And that's what that means to me. And that was just, that represents like that's the start of it all. That's why I'm still here, is because that camaraderie that we had.
That's fantastic. I love it. Great use of the model, great use of the metaphor, and such a fantastic story, right? When you can work people and you end up work with people and you end up becoming friends. Like there's
Yeah.
a level of working relationship that can actually blossom into something more, right? Due to that. So
Yeah.
I would hold that thought. We're gonna dive back into that in a little bit, but since we're in the middle of our building phase, I wanna jump into our next build, mainly because
Okay.
it's the opposite. It's the exact
Oh.
opposite. I want you to think of like what is the worst team scenario you've ever been a part of, and like why? Why was it bad? Why do you think it was that bad? We've all had bad scenarios, right? And so spend a couple minutes and just jump to the other side of the fence and build a model that represents that worst team scenario that you've ever been a part of. All right, I'm excited to see the challenging, we'll call it the challenging team model.
Yeah. All right. So this is the model I created. Um, the At one point I stepped away from a more technical role and decided to try out sales. I did it with intent. I wanted to. Before that, I was a controls technician, and I was really good at like the tactical work that we did. But my manager consistently gave me the feedback that he wanted me to learn more about the business from like a big picture perspective of like developing scope of works, interacting with clients, managing projects like more holistically, instead of just kind of going out there and being essentially the guy that turns the wrenches or writes the code and makes it work. And I thought, and I really wanted at this point I was like overseas and I wanted to come back, and I figured those two together, I'm gonna go ahead and try my hand at sales engineering. And it was a I learned a lot, but this model represents why it was so bad. So here, you can see that this is not my typical square structure. um, there's these like different areas. So you got a block here, a block here, a block here, and they're not connected. They're not directly connected with each other. So there's all these little silos. And the block on top of it represents a person in that space. And then you got this little guy here who was my manager at the time, sitting at the top, away from everybody else, and there's a little eyeball on top of his head, and that represents like he was only worried about himself. So when I was working in this position, I felt very isolated, and I felt like my manager didn't have my back in a lot of situations, and it was the things that at times when I would go ask for help or guidance, I felt like the response that I got was usually self-interest, and wasn't something that was very helpful for me. So eventually I left. I just didn't feel valued, and I didn't feel supported, and I didn't feel like I was a part of the team.
That's very powerful, and I think the metaphor, your model does a great job at just showing that separation, right? And
Yeah.
and what I find really interesting is that if we take the two models that you just built, there's a contrasting piece that really is in the connection. And at least that's what I'm seeing. Is there's a point of, and you said specifically, right? You had the three people that really clicked, which I don't think was intentionally a Lego pun, but I'm taking it as one. Because why not? But on the other side, right, is this isolation, right? And so really interesting kind of dynamic that stretches between those two. And I think, I'd love to transition now that we've kind of built and looked a little bit at the team dynamics of your history, or specifically of the good and bad, looking at your journey into leadership and these experiences you had, moving from a technical expertise role into leadership, like what were some of the challenges and discoveries that you made as you made that transition?
Yeah. So the experience I just told you about, wasn't the only time that I've experienced like a bad manager. So, when I finally got the opportunity to become a manager, it was around 2.5 years into my time here at Amazon. You know, probably a typical story where like, the manager at that time had left. There was a vacancy for a manager position on the team. I was the most tenured person. I got the opportunity to apply. I applied for the role. got accepted. But one of the thing that I was most anxious about was I didn't want to be a bad manager. Like I didn't want to be that guy I just told you about. I wanted to be someone who cared, someone who supported their team, and someone who made their team feel like they could trust them. So that was a really big thing for me, because I had some really terrible experiences with managers, and I knew I didn't want to be that person for someone else. So I I became just a really like a student of just trying to figure out like how to be a better leader. So immediately started reading like a bunch of books. But one of the first like mistakes that I made was not tailoring like my message or my approach. So like I had initially three people on my team, and I had to deliver. Someone needed vendor support probably within my first day of taking the role. I was just like, all right, here we go. This is actually happening. So I provided them like they wanted to have like very direct feedback on how they can get this vendor to deliver on something that they've been behind on. So I did exactly that. So when I talked to another team member who was also dealing with the vendor issue, I just came out the gate with like, this is exactly what we need to do. And that person was just like, Gio, I already did that. Like that, I don't need that from you. Like I wanted to just talk about it with you and brainstorm on what something I can do next. So I realized that like then that like tailoring was going to be a big part of the role, because like where one approach will work with someone else, that may piss the other person off, because they already may have already thought of everything, but they just want to kind of bounce some ideas off of me. So that was like one of the first things that I learned. And then with that came like focusing on trust and recognizing that like each person is going to be different, and leaning instead of like jumping into giving advice, like leaning more into being curious and about like who that person is and also what the problem they're dealing with.
I I love the approach that you talk about there, doing some research, right, and digging in and looking at with curiosity and trust, two things that really bubbled up there. But why do you think there are so many challenging leaders out there? Because I imagine,
Hmm.
I think you started off that answering that with, I've had many more rough experiences, and I think we all have. I think most people have had good and bad. I hope everyone's had some good at least. But there's a lot of challenge out there. Why do you think that is?
I think because at least when I first graduated, I think a popular leadership style was to be a commander and like or authoritative, where you came in, you're the manager, you have this group of people, and they essentially are there to do whatever you tell them to do. And that we've grown a long way from that, where I believe like being an empathetic leader, I feel like is no, now becoming the norm. But at least for most of my time as an IC, it was very common and almost like rewarded if a manager came in and just like set the direction and told everybody what to do and just got work done. It was I felt like at least from my experience that companies are more focused on what that manager could deliver versus like how they treated their employees to get that result.
It makes a lot of sense, and right, times have changed, people have changed, and the expectation of what leadership is
Yeah,
probably constantly changing to a certain degree.
yeah.
I I kind of want to lean into actually expectations next, because I think that actually they're
Mm,
related. And so as you went from individual contributor into leader, you probably had some expectations on what the job would be and what the role would be,
yeah.
and I'm sure there were some surprises, as you've already shared one. But like, how did the reality really shift between what you thought it would be versus what it actually is, and how does that continue to do so in your role day to day?
One of the biggest, I guess, like surprises, I guess you can say, that I had when I like stepped into manager role was being a line manager. You're kind of in this like in between position within the organization, especially if you're in a part of a large team. So I am essentially one layer, like if you think about a hierarchy, I'm one layer above like the engineers on my team, and then above me is many layers of management. Uh, so there are a lot of times where cross team goals, like functional team goals, just kind of come down to my team. And at that point, uh, I don't always have the opportunity to say no. It's more of how do I get my team on board and figure out how we deliver it. And that is probably one of the most challenging things that I have to deal with as a manager on the day-to-day basis because a lot of my team, even myself, like we do have our core responsibility and we would love to just like really zone in, lock in and focus on that every day. But as a big organization, we have a lot of teams, we have a lot of people, we have a lot of people on these teams, and everybody's coming up with new ideas on how we can deliver value, all within with the customer in mind. But it's difficult to manage all of that, especially when you only have a little amount of time in a day. So what I've recently learned, and this is something I've been doing this for about 3 years now. I would love to say I'm great at it. I'm still getting better at it every year. But one of the things that I've recently learned is I took a master class by Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, and in it he talks about having like narrowing your team focus on what matters most, and that has really and then so combination with focus and then more tactical. I read this book called Build by Swarmio, which is a productivity app that identifies like this Eisenhower matrix, which allows you to categorize things into like important and urgent or just important. And I combined both of those concepts to review like all the cross-functional team goals that my team is responsible for supporting, and just laid out like priorities. Like if we have, let's say, 10 big goals that we're supporting, these are the three that you focus on first. And you don't work on the other ones until you get these done. And that has, I believe, provided some clarity. But it's something that I revise my approach to this every year, just to try something different and see what works best.
Yeah. I mean, the systems. It sounds like a great system that you've built, right? And combining those tools together, and also to your point, right? The cross. I love too with cross-functional support. And one of the
Yeah.
challenges that seems to be quite common, especially in larger enterprise organizations, but I think across most organizations, is the varying needs of cross-functional teams, and then there's the needs of your team, right? And so, how do you balance that? You have your system, but you said you can't say no.
Yeah.
But I imagine you have to say no sometimes. Like, how do you decide when to say no, and are you able to do so in that role? Are you able to push back and say, yeah, hold on,
Yeah.
we're doing this other thing right now that isn't according to your matrix important
Yeah.
or urgent, right?
If your organization, like your team that you're on or your department, has decided on goals, those are usually set and agreed upon by your senior leaders, and, that these need to be done. But if we get requests from partner teams, that's where I ask more questions before we just take on that initiative. So like really understanding like why is this important? Or, like what is the overall goal for this? Why is it important and why now? And then I usually at Amazon that's in the form of that eventually is delivered in the form of like a one pager. And then I will also review that with my manager, because if it's if it has a potential to affect the rest of the department, like I want buy-in from my manager as well. So sometimes that person won't come back to you because you've asked them to actually write down their ideas and they've made the decision that it wasn't that important. But other times, like they'll present something to you and you might think it actually has value, and then you can actually workshop that with them to get to a point where it's now something that can scale and really like improve all of our data centers. So I take the approach of asking questions first and understanding like what it is that they want to achieve and why, what value or impact it would have. And then if we need to, and then identify like if we need to present this to someone else before we go ahead and make that change. And then also like evaluating if my team has, I almost use a Amazon acronym, evaluating if my team has like the availability and capacity to deliver on it, right? Like sometimes I have had partner teams come to me with requests that I truly believe in, but my team does not have the availability at that time to support it. So I may bring this up to my manager and see if someone else on the team has some bandwidth. So that's like one way that I try to balance that, so that way I'm not overburdening my team. Like good idea, but maybe someone else could help you instead.
Right. Good idea. Rough timing.
Yeah.
Maybe another time.
Yeah.
It makes total sense and a great system. Uh, Switching tacks just a little bit and looking back at the team scenario, right? So now you've been an individual contributor, you've become a leader, and you're right, considering consistently playing and tweaking your systems and your tools and what you're doing. However, your team doesn't have the knowledge that you do. You have a different perspective, and you see how everything goes. What do you think is the one thing that would help every person on a team to maybe understand either about leadership or about the team in general? Because you see all the interactions, all the interconnections, the cross-functional everything we even just covered in those last, so far today is all right part of the mix that ties into connection, productivity, efficiency. All of it combines. What's the thing that would potentially help them understand?
So, Amazon has leadership principles, and one leadership principle that is often listed as a growth area for people who are, relatively new to Amazon or looking for that next step is think big. So think big is like when you're an individual contributor, you are responsible for delivering the tasks that you are assigned. So in reference to the data center industry, we have engineers that are assigned to specific data centers and supporting that data center and the team that's there. And they will be responsible for resolving service requests and also delivering projects at those buildings. And it's really easy for engineers to focus on like the problems that they're having at their building, at their data centers, and delivering and resolving those issues for their customers. But the next step to move into like a leadership position, whether it be like going down the senior individual contributor route or becoming like a manager and pursuing that path, is the ability to then like, oh, I'm having this problem at like within my scope. How could this potentially like affect other people? Are there other folks that are having a similar issue? Like, could I share the solution that I came up with to help everyone else on the team avoid this problem? Or have I identified a process that's broken that could potentially improve productivity for the rest of the team? So it's that, I feel like that's identifying in terms of a leadership quality that you asked me about for ICs, is like identifying patterns that could lead you to determining what improvements we need to make either technically or procedurally, or even potentially like training, right? Like bringing new people onto the team and training them. That's a really big component, like in terms of running a team. And if you were new and you went through the process and you were like, this is not that good. Like, how can we make that better for everyone else?
Great, excellent advice. I love it. I love it. So I think we've got time for one more quick build. Are you game for one
Oh,
more?
okay. Yeah.
One more quick one. We'll do this. We'll do this a fast one. And so for our final build is Gio. I want you to think of someone who is maybe where you were a few years back, and they're about to embark on their first leadership journey. I want you to build a model that represents some advice that you would give any person moving from their first technical independent role to a leader. So Gio, I'd love to see your advice model.
This is what it is. This is my model. So when you transition from an individual contributor to a manager, you really have to lean into metrics and like measuring like how well your team is performing. And it can be so easy to get lost or too focused on measuring those metrics, looking at spreadsheets, looking at charts and different other data analytic tools, that you lose sight of like really interacting with your team and potentially even your customers and being able to drive real change and understand like your team's pain points. So this represents a spreadsheet. This is like a little bar chart, and this is like your and my advice is, like I read this quote in Ramit Sethi's book about I will teach you how to be rich, and it's basically a personal finance book, and in it he says, life exists outside the spreadsheet. And when I read that line, I was like, wow, that's so powerful because I've had such a large team for the last like around year to year and a half, that I didn't have the ability to like get in like face to face with my team the way I would have liked to. So we've done some organization structure org changes that have now allowed me to have a little bit of a smaller team. And one of the things that I'm really looking forward to when I get back from leave is spending that time in person with the team once in a while, and just spending that time with the customers and really understanding like what are the current pain points that my team is having, and how can I help make that better. So life exists outside the spreadsheet and that's a good for work, and that's also good for like personal life. It's really easy to just get on our phones and watch a bunch of Netflix, but go out there and create some experiences.
I love it. I love it. Fantastic model, and thank you so much for sharing. Thank you, Gio. What did you think of the Lego method? How did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy building your models out of Legos?
You know, so I've done one other podcast before, and I will say that building the Legos was way more fun, but it was a lot of fun. I think it's a great idea you have here.
Jiovanni, thank you so much for joining us. I know you're writing out there. Tell the people where we can find more of you on the internet.
Oh yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn, Giovanni Rosario. You can also find me on Medium at Giovanni Rosario. I also have a Substack newsletter that I work on, which is called Becoming a Leader. That's where I share stories about my journey and learning how to become a better leader and support my team.
Awesome. And we'll have those in the show notes as well. So if anyone wants to find more of Giovanni, those links will be available. Thank you so much for joining us, Gio. Really appreciated you spending your time today. And thank you to all the listeners for coming. This is Herding Squirrels, where we uncover the heartbeat of teams. Have a great day, everyone.